All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about OpenNebula and how OpenNebula works with Docker. Um, our approach is that OpenNebula is the virtual infrastructure that is needed to provide support to deploy Dockers. I'm going to talk about how we see the general workflow of people that interact with that use OpenNebula that want to interact with Docker. We have the role of a developer. And this guy, the developer, he doesn't know anything about the infrastructure. He doesn't know anything about what's executing his container. He's simply writing an application and packaging within a standard format, which is Docker. Docker is a fun format to distribute and deploy applications. So he only cares about this, right? He only cares about packaging an application and shipping it to some other guy who will deploy it. And what is it that this guy generally does? Well, they have a workflow, people that develop with Docker. They create a Docker file, which will build an application based on some other application and some based operating system. And they will think about how this will work with some other applications, but they don't care about where it's going to really run. And Docker provides with some amazing features in order to streamline this process. I can find an application that already does something similar to what I want to do. I'm going to pull from their Docker repository, and I'm going to modify this in order to customize it to exactly what I need. And then I'm going to tag this tag this version of my application. And in the future, I can upgrade it and all this kind of thing. So Docker is really, really, really great at doing this. But then there's some other guy, which is the system administrator, the DevOps, or whatever, and he's in charge of deploying these applications in production. And he's another guy. He's not the same. He may be the same guy, but he's wearing a different hat. He's just he doesn't care about what is happening inside the applications. He just knows how to treat them from the outside and how to deploy them. And this is the guy that should care about if he's deploying an application, the container, the application in Amazon, or in OpenShift, or in Kubernetes, or in OpenNebula. So how is this guy going to do this in OpenNebula? Well, the answer is very easy. You get all those containers, and you put them into virtual machines. So this is quite a good thing that you can do when you're the guy that needs to deploy the containers, because you can group them together into virtual machines. And this is a much better, this provides much better security and a much better isolation to pinpoint exactly where your container is going to run. The containers are not going to be stealing CPU resources from people that are running in other VMs, because VMs are better at doing this particular task. So the developer, he only cares about the Docker workflow. He doesn't want to learn another API. He doesn't want to learn about how to use OpenNebula. He doesn't want to know what to use all this kind of stuff. He doesn't need to know about the underlying infrastructure. But the DevOps does. And for the DevOps, or for the sysadmin, it's very, very cool to have an underlying infrastructure that it's infinite, that it's a cloud, because he knows he can grow. He can leverage the virtualization technology. He can do live migrations of the virtual machines that are running the applications. He can resize them. He can, clone them, do lots of stuff. He can package whole services that contain lots of Docker containers inside of it and clone it, so he can really streamline this process. And using VMs, it's really good for security. It's a really best practice, right? So how does the administrator achieve this? How does he get to deploy containers in OpenNebula? Well, they do this through a tool which is Docker Machine. What Docker Machine does, it gets a regular server and it gets a virtualization platform like OpenNebula or VirtualBox or OpenStack or Amazon, and deploys a virtual machine which has the capability to execute containers. In OpenNebula, this machine that we are executing is it's a virtual machine, and not. I mean, generally, people may want to use their own laptop, but they want to use some other, provider, infrastructure provider. They can use, for instance, VirtualBox, or they can use a public cloud or OpenNebula, and they will, they will instantiate a virtual machine that has inside of it Docker. And to do this, an example, but there are many, many other possibilities, but one example is boot to Docker. Boot to Docker is a very small release, which is it's based on TinyCore, which is a Linux distribution. And this release, it basically has the Docker daemon. So if you launch a virtual machine with the Docker daemon running, you have the ability to execute Docker containers. And this is what this project provides, a virtual machine that has Docker daemon inside of it. So in OpenNebula, what do you need to deploy this boot to Docker or any other operating system that has the ability to execute containers? You need access to the OpenNebula cloud, of course. I mean, if I'm deploying the virtual machine in OpenNebula, I need to have access to this cloud. I need to have an image that includes this Docker daemon. Boot to Docker, Ubuntu, whatever it is. As long as it has the Docker daemon, it's fine. Then I'm going to install this piece of software called Docker Machine, which allows you to deploy the virtual machine directly in the cloud management provider. Docker Machine doesn't come with the support for, doesn't ship with support for OpenNebula, but there's a plugin, an official plugin, that will allow you to deploy machines in OpenNebula. Okay, so I'm going to show how this looks to you, show you how this looks like. I'm, actually like this. Forget about this other host. This is the virtual machines that I have running in OpenNebula that are able to execute containers. And I can see Docker host 1 because I provisioned it through the Docker machine. How do I do this? Docker machine create, the driver in this case is OpenNebula. I need to provide what network is this virtual machine going to be connected to, what is the name of the image that I need to deploy, and what is the size of the image that I'm deploying. In this case, 10 gigabytes. So if I do this, it's starting a VM. If I go to OpenNebula now, I'll see there's a new VM. Oops. There's a new VM here, Docker host 2, that is being deployed, and it's booting, and it's starting the Docker service, and it's exchanging the keys with Docker machine, so Docker machine is able to control it. Right, so it's booting up. It says waiting for SSH, so it starts booting. This could be an Ubuntu machine. In this case, it's Ubuntu Docker, but it could be an Ubuntu machine. Okay, so now it booted up, and now it says I'm provisioning everything, and now I can talk to this virtual machine through through Docker. In order to do so, it tells me how to do this. I need to do Docker machine env. This will print out some environment variables that I can use to talk to this virtual machine. And an example here would be so I'm going to execute Docker run busybox hello world, and this is contacting this virtual machine, downloading the image, executing the container that says simply hello world. So this is basically how it works. When you use Docker machine with the OpenNebula driver, there are many options that can be used. Like for instance, instead of defining exactly what is the image, what is the size of the disk, you can provide with a template name. And this template name, there's a shortcut to creating this template for boot to Docker, which is going to the storage apps. And if you look here for boot to Docker, this is available. This is in the public marketplace, so it's available for all OpenNebula installations. If you click on it, you can send it to your OpenNebula installation. And if you do, I'm going to change the name because I already have one. You can put it in. It allows you to. It prompts you for the data storage you want to store it in. So you can click in here and you click on download, and it will register into your OpenNebula instance. And the result is simply having a boot to Docker here. And I can, this is mapped to a specific to a specific network with a specific size of the image, etc. There are many other options that you can change, like the memory and things like this when you're executing Docker machine command. But you can also do this with a template. Docker also has another project which is Docker Swarm, and Docker Swarm allows you to deploy a service that is composed by multiple containers, and it will control, an overlay network, and it will allow you to connect your containers even if they are in different hosts. So you have the Docker Swarm, which is executing containers which are on top of multiple of Docker hosts, right? And our idea, which is something that we are working on, we have not finished, is that we want to integrate this with OneFlow in the sense that if the Docker Swarm runs out of resources and cannot deploy more containers because it doesn't have enough capacity in the aggregated virtual machines that are executing containers, with OneFlow you can scale this up and they will appear in the service. So it's like this, right? You have the Docker Swarm, and you have a pack of containers that compose an application, and you deploy it, and they are sent over to different virtual machines, which are the Docker hosts, and they communicate through an overlay network that is completely managed by Docker. Docker Swarm works in OpenNebula. You can make it work. So I can simply follow the quick start guide of Docker Swarm, and everything will work with the overlay network, and I will be able to deploy all of this. What doesn't work yet is the integration with OneFlow, and this is something that will be a major point for us for the next release for OpenNebula 5.6. So there's one thing that I wanted to communicate is that Docker has this Docker machine project, which allows you to deploy new Docker hosts and different providers, and lots of components in the ecosystem of Docker are relying on Docker machine to provision Docker hosts. So in short, if it supports Docker machine, if the component that you're working with supports Docker machine, it supports OpenNebula. And for this, I just wanted to demonstrate how Rancher works. Rancher is it's a container management platform. It orchestrates the network, the storage, the hosts, the containers, the services, the swarms, and all of this with a pretty graphical user interface. And it works basically because it supports Docker machine, like most of the components in the Docker environment, in the Docker ecosystem. So what do I need to deploy? What do I need to do to deploy the Docker Swarm? I simply need to execute this. Sorry. Okay, so I need to execute. I'm going to simply execute the Rancher server Docker, which is available in the Docker Hub. And this is all it takes, right? I simply click here, and it will start downloading the image. I have already pulled the image, so it doesn't take a long time during the demo. But now it's executing. Now it's executing it. So I'm going to do docker logs -45, which is the the rancher, and it's still, bootstrapping the service. And we'll see soon that it started listening on port 8081, port 8080, and I will connect to this port, and I'll show it to you. I need to connect to the IP of the virtual machine that is executing this, right? Because this is actually happening inside the Docker host 1. This is happening in this virtual machine because I already provisioned it to execute Dockers. So this is happening inside this virtual machine. So I need to connect to 10.3.420 on port 8080, port 8081. Still not yet configured. Now it's listening, I think. So this is rancher. This is simply, I'm executing this inside a virtual machine in OpenNebula, right? Because it's as easy as this, right? If I have the ability to work with Docker machine, I have the ability to work with the ecosystem. So I'm going to add a new host, a new OpenNebula host. I'm going to go to hosts. And I'm going to activate the OpenNebula add-on, which is here somewhere. Here. Now it's downloading the plugin and enabling it. So then I can go to the hosts section and add the host. It's an OpenNebula host. I'm going to call it 102. My credentials of the now image template name boot to Docker. This is going to be a boot to Docker instance because I know it can execute Dockers, and the network name is going to be private. And create. So now I have this virtual machine, this host here, which is in reality a virtual machine executing in OpenNebula. Here it is, and it's going to be provisioned. Now this is going to take a very long time because it needs to pull all the data from Rancher server, and it takes like 15 minutes in this particular connection. In a faster connection, it goes faster. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to go to another Rancher server which has all this finished, okay? Which is this one. Okay, so now I have finished the provisioning. It goes to, everything works. It says unsupported Docker version, but it works still. And it has a bunch of containers that are executing inside of the rancher that are checking, the overlay network, the health checks, and stuff like this. So now I can simply operate with this rancher. I go to containers, and I can create a new container, test, busybox, image busybox, echo hello world. I click create, and now this will pull the container and execute it here. So this is like an orchestrator of containers. And basically the idea, here it is, stopped. I can go to view logs, and it says hello world. So the container worked and everything is working fine. It would create an overlay network if I ask it to, and all these things. So basically, in short, if it supports Docker machine, which basically everything in this ecosystem does, it supports OpenNebula, and you can use OpenNebula transparently with your Docker workflow. And to end this presentation, I would like to mention three extensions, three integrations that have been developed by the community, which are, I believe, very interesting. You have one doc, which basically what it does, it deploys Dockers instead of virtual machines, right? So you have a hypervisor, you have a host in OpenNebula, which is a Docker, which is a Docker machine, and you can register Dockers and execute them, right? The other one is LXD1, which is the same. It's more or less the same thing, but instead of talking to Docker, you talk to LXC directly through the component LXD that was developed by Ubuntu. And the idea is that you're deploying containers. You don't have the Docker ecosystem, but the technology that executes them is the same thing. Right? It's an LXC. And this one works really, really, really great. And finally, something that Justin mentioned this morning, we have the Corona project, which basically it's a whole different deal. The idea is that this component distributes OpenNebula in Docker containers. So you have the front end in Docker and the hypervisor in Docker. There are some things that are difficult to configure, but the Corona works. So you can execute virtual machines by deploying OpenNebula using Corona. And that's it. Do you have any questions regarding, yeah?
Yeah, I might have missed it. How is Rancher able to launch the VM? Are you entering credentials or something?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just gonna.
No, that's okay. You don't have to show me.
I'm just.
Yeah. You don't have to show me. That's fine.
Now you have to wait until everybody.
There was some kind of magic that was going on.
Right. So you go to hosts and you select OpenNebula, and this is the account access. You enter the endpoint and your credentials, and now it contacts OpenNebula. So of course, Rancher needs to have access to the OpenNebula cloud.
The OpenNebula button in Rancher is already there?
Yeah, it's already there.
So that implies that whatever VLAN you're landing on needs to also be have access to the controllers.
Whatever VLAN?
So whatever network the VM lands on. So not all of our networks can access the controllers. So just sort of thinking out loud.
Right. So yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's the thing. You need to choose here network, which I typed here private, which is the network that is the management interface. So I can actually reach OpenNebula with this.
Has there been any thought? So I'm guessing volumes don't work well. I've used the Docker machine integration with OpenNebula. In fact, we did that at Container Days in Boston. Everyone was trying to pull so many Docker images that the Wi-Fi went to crap. This was at the Microsoft Center over at the Nerd Center. And so we actually used this to connect to OpenNebula in our infrastructure and just use our network over there, which was great. But back to the original question. So volumes, I'm guessing you just have to SSH there and secure copy files over there to actually link volume. So a common thing is to link in storage, which I guess in this case would generally be on the host.
So right. So
you would have to put whatever you need there remotely. So anytime you're using locally the Docker command -v, for example,
yeah.
you need to be thinking about what's on the VM and not the local machine.
Exactly.
Small shift.
Exactly. So for instance, you could deploy, for instance, mount as FFS share when the VM starts, and then you have the -v option in Docker. But yeah, this is something that you have to design it, but it works. Any more questions? No? Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. You can now rest. You earned it. Okay, so up next is highly similar. Did I got that right? Okay, so Hailey's gonna talk us about multi-site hyperconverged, I guess, OpenNebula with 30B9.